Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You found the Dark Oak.
Today we're going to discuss the highly anticipated, highly requested case of the murder of Robert Wone.
I was one of the requests.
You absolutely were. I know this one has been on your list for a long time. And I don't know how familiar you are with this case, but let me just tell you, you guys need to get ready because this case is wild. It's insane. For this episode, I am actually going to have to give listener discretion warning. So in the past, we've heard from parents that our show is one they feel safe listening to with their teenagers or sometimes even with their younger kids running around. We don't use bad language. However, full disclosure, this may not be the episode for that. We're going to be discussing some really adult subject matter. Now, I will remain as clinical as I possibly can, and it is very relevant to the case, so I need to talk about it. But I just wanted to provide that warning to you, our listeners, so that you can decide what is best for your family.
Hashtag earmuffs.
Hashtag don't come for me if you spend your evening answering a bunch of questions that you were not prepared for if you did not heed my warning.
All right, I feel very adult right now.
Okay.
Well, now I'm going to have to get through this quickly because I want to get to the case. Thank you for joining us at the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through a Branch of Hope Fund, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a non-profit organization featured at the beginning of each month. To find out more details, head to our website or just hang out and we will give you all the details. Okay, Cynthia, tell me more.
Okay. Well, Robert Eric Wone was born on June 1st, 1974. And Robert had a great childhood and actually discovered an interest in politics when he was in high school. At the time of our story, he was a 32-year-old, fourth-generation Chinese American who worked as a prominent attorney at Radio Free America, which was located in downtown Washington, D.C. Now, Robert and his wife, Kathy, actually lived in Oakton, Virginia, but they would both commute to their offices every morning on the metro.
Smart. I feel like that's pretty common to live in the burbs.
It is. Now, I've never lived in or around DC area, but apparently this metro commute, even without traffic, even if you didn't live like very far out, would oftentimes take at least an hour.
Yeah.
So on August 2nd, 2006, when Robert was scheduled to work a much later evening than usual, he actually had a meeting with the night staff scheduled, which meant that this meeting wouldn't even take place till well after 9 p.m. And he knew his wife, Kathy, had an early morning the next day, and if he was coming home, she'd stay up, to make sure he made it home.
Sure.
He didn't want to disturb her. So he decided that instead of taking the metro all the way home that night, he decided to call a couple of his friends who lived in the downtown area and ask if he could crash at their place. And this was not unusual. It was something he'd done before, not strange at all.
It seems reasonable to me.
Exactly, especially knowing he had to get right back up first thing the next morning and get right back to the office. So Robert first contacted a woman friend from college that lived in the downtown area, and then he reached out to his old college buddy, fellow attorney Joseph Price. Now, Joseph and Robert were very close friends, and they had been actually since they were 18 years old. So they didn't go back quite as far as you and I do, Steph. What was ours? First grade, second grade, third grade?
First grade?
Yeah, first grade. But, they were still pretty young when they met.
They qualify.
They did. They were old friends. And Joe was actually the first of these friends who lived downtown to get back to Robert. And he said, of course, yes, you can come stay the night. This was actually really convenient for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because Robert had a potential work project that he wanted to speak to Joe about. And secondly, Joe only lived about a mile from Robert's office in a set of row houses that was about 100 years old.
Oh, perfect.
Yes. Now, Joe lived in this home with his partner of 5 years, Victor Zaborski, and their lover, Dylan Ward. So the three men were in a polyamorous relationship, with Joe and Victor being the primary relationship, but both also sharing a relationship with Dylan. The three described themselves as a family, but again, it was really Victor and Joe who had that primary relationship.
Okay.
Because of Joe's close friendship with Robert, Victor and Dylan had also gotten to know Robert over the years and become friendly. And the three had even hosted Robert's surprise 30th birthday party just a couple of years earlier. Here is what we know about the night in question. We know that Robert called Kathy at 9:30 p.m. and his last words to her were, "I love you."
Oh.
He then met with the night staff at RFA, Radio Free America, at around 9:40 p.m.
Okay.
Robert then called Joe, presumably to let Joe know he was leaving the office and he was going to head that way. So Robert then got in a cab and arrived at Joe's house around 10:30 p.m. Now, by the time Robert had arrived, Victor had already gone upstairs and excused himself and gone to bed. He was actually watching Project Runway when Robert arrived. So he had no interaction whatsoever with Robert that evening prior to them going to bed. So Joe said that when Robert arrived, he offered Robert a glass of water. The two men made some small talk about Kathy and work, and then all of the men in the house went to bed at around 11 p.m. And Robert had said he was going to be taking a shower before he went to bed. Robert sent his last email from his BlackBerry at 11:08 p.m. At 11:49 p.m., Victor would make a bizarre 911 call because Victor and Joe would walk in on Robert having been stabbed.
Oh, no.
Now, we've talked before about how 911 calls can sound all different kinds of ways, right? And I will say this call was very strange.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes you were under duress. What did it sound like?
Well, at times, Victor would be sounding very hysterical and upset, and then he would suddenly sound really calm. And probably the weirdest thing was at one point he asked the dispatcher what time it was, which seems very strange to me. Like, who cares? Your friend was just stabbed. But
was he sleepwalking? Like, is he fully awake? What's going on right now?
No, I don't know the answers to that question, but that just seems strange.
Yeah.
Throughout the call, Victor also used the word "we" a lot. So he would say things like, "We heard a sound," "We found our friend," "We had someone staying over." He told the dispatcher that "we believe an intruder came into the house and used one of our knives to stab our friend." Again, this is kind of strange. Like, I don't know
the whole thing is strange. You basically have a period of 40 minutes. He sent an email and then some intruder came in and stabbed him. And then he was just found immediately. Like, the whole thing.
Well, and we'll go
bizarre.
over all of the details. We'll go over all of that, and it's not going to get any less bizarre.
Yeah. And the fact that he keeps saying "we," like, I mean, and maybe it really was, but are they like one person? Like, how could they both hear exactly the same thing? Anyway, I think I need more details because this is already sounding a little cray.
It's very bizarre. The dispatcher asked if Robert was breathing, and Victor said he didn't know, that he was on the 3rd floor and that his partner was on the 2nd floor with the friend who'd been stabbed.
Why isn't he down there?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think anybody does.
I mean, did he need some privacy to make a 911 call?
I don't know. The dispatcher advised Victor to have someone take a towel and put pressure on the wound. And if the towel got soaked thoroughly in blood, to just put another towel on top of the soaked towel. He was advised never to take that first towel off at any time, only to add dry towels on top.
Okay, sounds reasonable.
When EMT Jeff Baker arrived at the row house at 11:54 p.m., so only 5 minutes after this 911 call, he was met by the sight of a man on the front stoop who appeared to be freshly showered and was wearing a white robe. This man directed Jeff to the 2nd floor. So let me give you a little layout of this home and help you picture everything. This is a 100-plus-year-old row house. So you walk in the front door, and in front of you is a staircase leading up to the 2nd floor. On the 1st level is, the living space, the kitchen area, the living area, and out on the opposite side of the house is a back door leading out into a small courtyard. If you walk in the front door and go straight up the stairs, when you get to the top of the stairs, you will be face to face with a bedroom. That is Dylan's bedroom. If you turn 180 and then walk to the end of the hall, that is where the guest room / office space is. This is where Robert was spending the night.
Okay.
He was on a pull-out sofa. If you then turn around and face Dylan's bedroom again, there will be another staircase going up to the 3rd floor where there is another bedroom. That's where Joe and Victor live.
So kind of the primary bedroom.
Right. When Jeff made it to the 2nd floor, he was looking directly into Dylan's room. And he saw Dylan. He said on a documentary I watched, so I watched Who Killed Robert Wone on Peacock as preparation for this case, and it's really, really good documentary. I suggest anybody who's interested in this case go watch it, because I do think it was really good at being unbiased. They had the prosecutors, they had the defense team, they had Robert's friends. They just had a lot of people coming in and telling the story. And honestly, I have found nothing in that documentary to be disproven through any of the other research I've done. And I've done a lot of other research, including listening to the 5-part series that the Prosecutors podcast did on this case. And, they bring in, they go through the trial documents and they really deep dive. So I do think that documentary is a really, really good source for this case.
It's pretty high praise for a documentary, truly.
Yes, I really feel like they were really good at remaining unbiased.
Well, when you have a case like this, you don't have to make it more intriguing than it already is.
Oh, you definitely don't. But the reason why I stopped and talked about the documentary for a reason was because in the documentary, Jeff said that when he got to that 2nd floor, he saw a man who we learned to be Dylan in a white towel. But other witnesses say that all 3 men were wearing white bathrobes. So I'm not sure if it was a towel or a bathrobe, or if at one point he was wearing a towel, another point he was wearing a bathrobe.
So who was the man that was at the front door?
That was Victor.
Okay, so he met Victor at the door, man freshly showered in a robe, and then he goes upstairs and he sees Dylan in a towel.
In a white towel. He then turns around, does the about face, walks into the guest room, and there he sees Robert lying on the fold-out bed and Joe sitting on the bed in his underwear. However, Joe was not touching Robert in any way. He was not applying pressure to the wounds. He did not have his hands on Robert in any way, shape, or form, despite being told that that's what he needed to do.
Oh, I don't
Via
like
the,
that.
Right. Jeff said that immediately upon arriving at the home, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up because it just didn't feel quite right.
Like, even in this moment, I'm like, well, maybe they all slept in the nude and they just grabbed what was close or something. But something about this just would give me the willies, like the heebie-jeebies too.
So personally, I am not put off by the fact that these men were in various states of undress at all. Because if you were sleeping, you could sleep in the nude, you could sleep in your underwear, like,
of course,
and you're just going to grab a rope. I think it's a little strange that they all 3 had matching ropes, but then maybe it's not, because they were all
it's not.
in a relationship. Like, maybe that was their thing. Who knows? But so that part didn't bother me. But Jeff said that none of the 3 men were behaving as he would have expected them to be behaving.
They all seem strangely calm. Like, is this the Twilight Zone?
It kind of feels like it. Jeff was a really seasoned EMT with many years of experience. He'd been to many crime scenes. This one stood out to him. And initially, it was because of the behavior of the 3 men. Now, upon looking at the victim, who we know is Robert, Jeff noticed 3 stab wounds. But strangely, there was very, very little blood. He said it looked like Robert had been stabbed, then showered, and then placed in bed. Robert had no pulse and was clearly dead and appeared to have been dead for some time, as he was void of color and cold to the touch. And this is called pallor mortis, and it's when a body goes pale after the blood stops flowing, and it takes between 15 and 25 minutes after death for this to occur. Now, when I say there was very little blood, I mean, Stephanie, I recently cut my finger with a pair of scissors. I bled significantly more than was found at this crime scene. I mean, I bled. There was blood everywhere. Oh. And it was just a little finger cut. I got to talk to you about the blood. There were 2 very small, like softball size blood stains on the pull-out bed that Robert was lying on.
That this man is like bleeding out to death. And there's just 2.
I mean, he was stabbed, and there's 2 softball-sized blood stains underneath where he was laying.
Sus.
There was also a towel on the floor, the towel that Joe had allegedly been trying to stop the bleeding with. And again, when I say there's blood on this, I mean specks. specks. Less than, if you took all of the, it's maybe like 2 or 3, 4 locations where there's actually blood. And if you put them all together, it might be the size of a softball, like on this towel that apparently or allegedly was being used to like stop the bleeding.
Wow.
Laying on the nightstand was a steak knife with, again, very little blood. And the knife had come from the knife block that was downstairs in the kitchen. Robert's clothes were neatly folded. The bedding had been pulled down at a perfect 45-degree angle, and the pillow had one perfect head indentation in it. It literally looks as if someone had laid down on this bed, on their back, hands to their side, and not moved. It looks like it's been staged. If Robert was laying in this bed, sleeping, he is the stillest sleeper in the world. There was no movement, no disturbance of this bed other than an indentation where a head was in the middle of the pillow and the sheet or the blanket literally folded down. Like, it was very strange.
Bizarre.
Robert's wife, Kathy, got a call from Joe that evening telling her that she needed to get to the George Washington Hospital because Robert had been stabbed. And when she arrived at the hospital, she learned that her husband was dead.
Oh my gosh.
Joe, Victor, and Dylan were taken to the police station and interviewed separately.
Hopefully they had a chance to change out of their matching robes.
They did. They did,
Okay,
because
all
I
right.
saw the videos.
Okay.
It quickly became obvious that Joe was the ringleader. He had the strong personality. He was a boisterous attorney. Victor and Dylan were much quieter and soft-spoken, but all 3 men were professionals, highly respected, well-educated men. All 3 men shared a version of the same story. According to Joe and Victor, they heard the front door chime. So this is the front door on the bottom level. They
Okay.
heard it chime.
Okay.
As if it had been opened, but they did not get up to check and see who may have opened the door. This could be explained away by the fact that they know that there's 2 other men in the house that night. Maybe they think somebody just stepped out for some reason, but they did not open the door, or they did not go and explore to find out why the door had chimed. A few minutes later, they start to hear a low grunt sound, and this does cause them to get up, go downstairs, try to figure out what's happening. When they get to the bottom of their flight of stairs, they see into Robert's room. The door is open. Robert is covered in blood with a knife laying on his chest. Victor screams. Joe runs in, picks up the knife, lifts Robert's shirt, sees more blood, and then tells Victor to go back upstairs and call 911.
Okay, so that could explain why he was on the 3rd floor, even though, I think some people would have grabbed the phone and come back down, but, everybody reacts to trauma in different ways, so maybe he was just kind of frozen in stress.
Exactly.
And it sounds like Joe may, as you said, he was, maybe the more confident one, and so maybe he was like, he's like, I know Joe's down there with Robert.
Right. Now, during the initial grunting sound, Dylan did not wake up, despite being on the same floor as Robert.
Okay.
But he did wake up to the chaos that's now happening once Robert's been discovered.
Yeah, a man screaming in your house generally will arouse you.
Now, it is important to note that initially, Joe said the knife was laying on Robert's abdomen.
Okay, which is also a little strange.
So while being interviewed, when these 3 men separately are asked who killed their friend, they all allege that an intruder must have come in through their back door that they must have somehow left unlocked. And the back door was unlocked and left slightly ajar. However, the back door is not the door that would have chimed.
Okay, what?
Something else strange is this house, these stairs were like 100-year-old wooden stairs. There's no carpeting anywhere in this house. And these stairs were notoriously loud and creaky. You could not walk up or down the stairs without everybody in the house hearing it.
Oh.
And nobody in the house reported hearing this intruder walk up or down the stairs.
And to that point, if it was Dylan or Robert that opened the front door to go make a phone call, you would have heard them going up and down the stairs. Either way, if there's activity in the house, you would have heard the stairs.
Exactly. And Victor even admitted during his interview that, yeah, we should have heard movement on the stairs, and we didn't.
It's unusual.
It was also noted that during these interrogations, I'll call it an interrogation because that's what it turned into, all 3 men seemed noticeably unaffected by the murder of their friend.
See, that's like the Twilight Zone part of it. Hello, officer. Up here to our friend that just got stabbed in our home. It's so weird to me.
It's weird, but I also think I can kind of maybe explain that away by shock.
Maybe? All three of them?
Well, because they had moments, like Victor, like on the 911 call, he had moments of being completely distraught.
Okay.
To the point that actually the dispatcher thought he was a woman and kept referring to him throughout the call as ma'am, 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 because his voice had become so high-pitched.
Okay.
And he was, so distraught. So he definitely had moments. Okay. But I think by the time they got to the interrogation and the interview process, they were much calmer. But again, I can also see that being when shock has really like kind of set in.
Okay. Sure.
Immediately, authorities believed that one or more of these men were responsible for Robert's death. And so, as you can imagine, the police interviews got pretty heavy pretty quickly. The fact that the three men were homosexual and polyamorous came up throughout the interviews. Investigators repeatedly asked the men why Robert, a reportedly straight man, would spend the night with these three gay men. The interviewers did get, pretty insensitive. I was actually kind of getting offended for them while watching this line of questioning.
Like it was impossible for them to be friends. I mean, I'm not saying that one of these men didn't do something.
It was
Who cares?
It was very much a straight man would never come spend the night with you three gay men. Like that is just absurd. The only reason why another man would come stay with you guys is if he wanted to get involved. I mean, it was just close-minded. And I was kind of rolling my eyes throughout the whole interview. However, this is a police tactic.
Sure.
It's good cop, bad cop.
Sure.
Emphasis on bad cop. The authorities admitted that they were acting this way because they were trying to elicit some type of reaction. They were trying to stress these men out, try to get, some kind of a response. And over again, the three men stuck to their story that Robert was straight and they were just friends. Now, while these men were being interrogated, Detective Brian Wade was back at the crime scene gathering evidence. Now, this house was in pristine condition. Nothing was out of place. It was beautifully decorated. The house was well over $1 million home, which maybe doesn't mean that much now, especially in Washington, D.C. But it was a nice home and a nice neighborhood, nicely furnished, very well taken care of. Nothing appeared to have been taken. There were valuables all over the house, including in Robert's bedroom. There were 2 wallets because this I thought was really interesting. Robert carried a dummy wallet, so it was like his mugging wallet.
Oh my gosh.
So apparently he had his real wallet with his real valuables in it, but then he had a mugging wallet specifically for in the event he got mugged with just a little bit of cash, so he could use that as like a decoy and keep his real wallet.
My gosh. I wonder if he could stage it for like pickpockets. Like he could have it partially hanging out so they think they actually got it, but he's got his other one in like the front pocket or something.
I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant. Probably less so for a woman because both of my wallets would be in my purse. They'd just grab the purse. But especially for a man, I was like, that is brilliant.
And also, I feel terrible. How many times has he been mugged? What's been going on?
Washington, D.C. has a high crime rate. This is not really a safe place. Even the nice place is not really safe.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So his 2 wallets were laying there, as well as a Movado watch and a BlackBerry, and nothing was taken. Now, I told you that the 3 men alleged that it had to have been an intruder who for some reason came through the back door despite the front door chiming.
That's so strange.
There was no sign of forced entry, so the men told investigators that they must have left the back door unlocked, which again, it was unlocked and partially ajar. And right outside this door is a small courtyard, just a small courtyard with a 7-foot security fence that was deadbolted. And of course, this courtyard lined up to all of the neighbors' courtyards.
Right.
There was dirt, pollen, and cobwebs all over the top of this fence, and none of it appeared to be disturbed. So the idea that somebody scaled this fence, which was possible, defense team made sure we learned that it was possible, but the fact that somebody could have done it without disturbing any of the dust, the dirt, the pollen, the cobwebs seems unlikely at best.
And again, their own testimony is that the front door opened and closed.
Yes, but they also said, we heard the chimes, but they said, we think the intruder came in through the back door.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense.
If Joe, Victor, and Dylan's accounts were to be believed, an intruder would have had to climb over the 7-foot fence, again, from someone else's yard.
Without leaving any marks.
Right. Walk into the back door of the row house that was conveniently left unlocked, grab a steak knife, not a butcher knife, not a big butcher knife out of the knife block, but a small steak knife out of the knife block. This intruder would then have to walk to the front of the house, go up the first set of stairs, and somehow make no noise, walk right up to Dylan's room and decide, no, that's not the room I'm interested in, turn around, go into the guest room where Robert was staying, but was not normally there. So any other night, there would not have been anybody in this guest room. The perpetrator then, upon walking into Robert's room, instead of immediately stabbing him upon entering, walks around the bed because the bed was perpendicular, now trapping himself in the room. So if Robert wakes up, Robert's between him and the door. If anybody walks in, he's got further to go. The perpetrator then stabs Robert, then goes right back the way he came, again passing Dylan's room, back down the creaky stairs, and instead of going straight out the front door, which would have been right in front of him, he would have turned back around and gone back through the house and out the rear door, back over the 7-foot fence.
Seems unlikely.
When investigators couldn't get any of the 3 men to crack by insulting them and their lifestyle, saying they would never make it in jail and they would get eaten up by the other inmates, investigators attempted to turn them against each other, pointing out that Joe and Victor were upstairs and able to provide alibis for each other, but Dylan was alone on the same floor as Robert. Maybe he killed Robert.
I'm going to have to say, I'm kind of thinking that myself. Even though, I don't know, everybody's acting fishy.
I think it's a very valid question. I mean, he's on the same floor as Robert. He's only feet away from him. He's the only one who doesn't hear anything. He's the only one who doesn't have an alibi. I mean, again, the other guy's alibi is for each other. So, I don't know how much faith we can put in it, but...
Yeah, and then, he doesn't have to go up and down the creaky stairs.
True. So police asked Dylan to take a polygraph, and he did. And in this polygraph, he was asked, did you kill Robert? And do you know who killed Robert? And according to police, both of his responses showed deception indicated. Now, remember how initially Joseph had said that when he found Robert, the knife was laying on his abdomen?
Yeah.
Okay, Joe actually came back into the police station later to tell investigators that he had actually pulled the knife out of Robert's chest.
Oh.
Now, this struck detectives as strange.
Yes.
Because they didn't think it was likely that a person would forget that they pulled a knife out of their friend's body. That makes perfect sense to me. It seems like one of those things you might remember. At the same time, Joe's defense attorney made what I thought was a really good point and said, in that moment, you would be in shock. And the fact that Joseph went back after the fact to clarify that he'd pulled the knife out of Robert's chest actually confirmed that he was telling the truth, because he didn't have to go back and tell them that. He could have just continued with his initial story. So the fact that he wanted to go clarify it showed that he was being truthful. And I will say, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that a person would walk in, see their friend with a knife sticking out, and just automatically pull the knife out.
Right.
You should not do this. Our listeners probably already know that, but in case you don't, you should not do this. This should be left to a medical professional because you do increase the risk of bleeding and causing further damage. But I can see how it would be human nature to just want to get this knife out of your friend.
Sure.
But forgetting to mention it to the law enforcement is strange. I don't think there's any way around that.
Yeah.
24 hours after the murder, Deputy Medical Examiner for District Columbia, Dr. Lois Goslinowski, who at this point in her career had performed approximately 2,100 autopsies, did an autopsy on Robert Wone. She found what she described as 3 perfect slit-like defects in the front of Robert's torso. All 3 wounds were nearly identical in depth, width, and orientation. These wounds were so consistent that neither the attacker nor the victim could have been moving. The attacker, again, walked into the bedroom. The bed was perpendicular. He or she walked around. So they are now facing the doorway. They stabbed Robert 3 times at exactly the same angle, the same orientation, the same depth, everything. It was identical. It was like lifting the knife up, putting it down, and doing it identically 3 different times.
That is so weird.
It's nearly impossible. It's nearly
Yes.
impossible. In a stabbing, an attacker has to be close to their victim. There should be evidence of defensive wounds. Even if the first stab occurred when Robert was asleep, it should have woken him up. There was no evidence that he moved at all.
This is so weird.
No evidence of any kind of defensive wounds. It literally appears Robert was perfectly still while being attacked. And that the actual fatal wound that the examiner believes actually killed him would have taken about 60 seconds before he was rendered unconscious. So we're talking he was awake.
A minute is a long
for
amount of
at
time
least
in this situation.
a minute, not moving. Dr. Goslinowski would have expected to see significant blood loss with wounds such as these, but as we've already discussed, there was very little blood found at the scene.
You've covered a lot of bizarre things so far. The blood is, to me, the thing that keeps sticking in my head.
So weird. The autopsy concluded that Robert's cause of death were the stab wounds to his torso, and the manner of death was obviously homicide. Now, again, these wounds were not immediately fatal. After being stabbed, blood leaked into Robert's small intestine, and a blood clot began forming in a portion of his small intestine. And so this was consistent with Robert being alive for some time after being stabbed. And again, the evidence suggests he did not move at all.
And also, this would indicate to me that timeline of him being able to send that email may not make sense either. Because how did all this happen within a 30, 40-minute period?
I will say, yeah, the men say they went to bed at 11. He sent an email at 11:08, and we're calling 911 by 11:49.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to match either.
Well, there actually were, I don't have it here in my notes, there were actually unsent emails in his BlackBerry as well, which leads some people to question whether those unsent emails were actually drafted by him, because I've never had a BlackBerry, but apparently maybe they were kind of new at this time, and it kind of led some people to believe that maybe they were drafted to set up an alibi or a timeline, to fake a timeline. Oh, he was still alive because he sent these emails, but then whoever was drafting them didn't know how to actually send them, so they were left as drafts. But the 11:08 email was one that was, according to the prosecutor's podcast, who was actually going through the trial notes and stuff, was actually sent.
Yeah, but was it sent by him?
Well, that we don't know.
Right.
That we don't know.
This is what I'm saying.
But he didn't even get there till 10:30. So 79 minutes after arrival, he's, we're calling 911. So no matter how the story goes, we didn't have a lot of time here.
Right.
Now, what could explain the fact that Robert didn't move at all during this attack?
I mean, I'm kind of thinking maybe if he was drugged, but even that would take some time to set in before
Sure.
he was stabbed.
Well, authorities first thought maybe he'd been restrained. But there were no ligature marks anywhere on his body.
Yeah, and again, the bed was set up like nobody had been moving. Even if you're restrained, are you going to be kind of moving a bit, maybe?
He would have had to have been tightly restrained, but I guess that's not impossible, especially as I reveal more information to you.
Okay.
But let's talk about the potential that he was drugged. There were numerous needle puncture marks on Robert's neck, on the back of his hand, on his ankle, on the top of his feet, and one in the center of his chest.
Oh, was he a drug user?
No, he was not.
Oh. Okay, so this is very intriguing.
It is, until you realize that there were life-saving attempts made by both EMTs and hospital staff. So they were trying to set up IVs. And I know that several of them they attempted, but they did not work. So actually, most of these needle puncture marks were able to be explained away as something done either by the EMTs or the hospital staff. However, there were two that nobody could account for.
Yeah. See, yeah. Fishy.
the one on his ankle, and the one in the center of his chest.
Yeah, those seem very strange places.
At the same time, I had to take my toddler in he had the really bad flu, and he just literally would not cooperate when they were trying to give him an IV, and they were going to do it literally in his forehead, which sounds terrible.
Yes.
But it was like the one place that he wouldn't be able to kind of fight him off. So yes, it does seem strange, but if you keep trying, and you're not successful, then, they'll try any vein they can get to. So it doesn't, after they were going to put an IV in my baby's forehead,
Oh, no.
I was like, yeah, maybe the top of the foot isn't that weird. Maybe the ankle's not that weird. Now, Joseph and Victor were very prominent in the gay community. They had founded LGBT organizations. They acted as outspoken advocates for equality. And because of this, they really had the support of the local gay community. And in the days after Robert's murder, investigators interviewed Kathy, and the line of questioning made it obvious to her that investigators thought Joseph, Victor, and Dylan were responsible for her husband's death. After learning that Kathy had been interviewed, Joe called to find out if Kathy would tell him what detectives had asked her, which is a strange thing to do to a grieving widow, right? To call your friend and be like, hey, what did they ask you? I don't know. It seems insensitive to me.
It does seem insensitive. I don't know that I'd think any more than that, though.
Okay.
And again, he's a prominent attorney, right?
He is, and he, as I said, like the line of questioning made it clear that investigators thought they knew something.
I think in his profession, I think that's probably him saying, I just want to get a feel on what's going on, even if he's innocent. Wouldn't you want to know?
Yes. I just don't think I would call a grieving widow and be like, tell me everything.
Yes. Does it mean that he's guilty? No.
Okay.
That's my feeling.
I see that. I do.
mean, you can kind of be... I'm not going to go as far as to call him a jerk yet, but you could be a jerk and not be a murderer.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, then how do you feel about this? In the days after the murder, Joseph, Victor, and Dylan came to Kathy's house and had a private meeting with her. And it was everyone's understanding that when they left, she still had complete faith that what they were saying was the truth.
Well, I think the word meeting could be interpreted a couple different ways. Like, is it like, Kathy, what can we do to help you? Here is a charcuterie board. Here are some flowers. Can we hire someone to help you around the house? Can we help you with funeral arrangements? Or was it, okay, Kathy, so here's what happened, and we need to make sure that you're not saying anything different to anyone else. I think there are just so many different ways a meeting could go, right?
Right. And nobody really knows because it was a private meeting down in the basement. So, don't know.
Again, if they really are like, I cannot believe this happened in our house. I feel so badly. You're a widow. I don't know. Maybe it was out of kindness.
Reaching out does, I would definitely reach out. Yeah, I would definitely reach out. I just,
But at that point, Kathy was like, oh, they're good guys. That was her interpretation.
It was. It was. Now, Joe ended up hiring defense attorney Bernie Grimm, very famous defense attorney in the Washington, D.C. area. In the days after the murder, investigators did a door-to-door canvass asking neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything unusual. And the next-door neighbors were an older couple, and each night they would watch the news between 11 and 11:30. And they had this favorite news anchor who was on every night during that specific period of time. So when this couple was interviewed, they said that at some point during that news segment, they heard a scream coming from next door. And it is widely accepted that this scream was Victor's scream when he discovered Robert.
Right, which, again, matches the testimony of the men.
Right. Now, investigators verified that this news anchor that this couple liked to watch was only on from 11 to 11:30 on this particular evening. She wasn't even in any, commercials or anything, which means they could have heard that scream as early as 11, but as late as 11:30. The 911 call was made at 11:49. So it appears it took him somewhere between 19 and 49 minutes to call 911.
That doesn't sound like I screamed and then ran upstairs and called 911.
Exactly. Now, investigators point back to the fact that during that 911 call, Victor asked the dispatcher what time it was. And again, we mentioned that seems strange. Is it possible that they were trying to establish some type of a timeline? Or was he just in shock? I don't know. But
It does seem fishy.
it's strange. But at the same time, how stupid do you have to be? Like, trying to not seem suspicious? Again, these are not stupid men. You're trying to not seem suspicious, so
Well,
you're going to ask the dispatcher what time it is?
Well, and not to mention, like, the 911 dispatcher doesn't have a timestamp, like, on the time the call came in. If you're trying to establish some kind of alibi, they don't need to say, oh, it's 11:49 p.m.
I kind of took it as if Victor was actually genuinely wanting to know what time it was.
Right. Well, this is what I'm saying. But if the idea was to establish an alibi, you don't have to have the dispatcher say it on the line.
Right.
For that, to know that call came in.
Right.
You know?
But he may have been actually curious. He may have really not known what time it was.
Well, I'm sure that's what he wants everybody to think.
Right.
If he is.
Which could make sense, I guess, if you were woken out of a dead sleep to all this chaos. What time is it? You don't even know what time it is.
But again, who cares?
Exactly. And I think that's just kind of the big question. Like, it doesn't matter if it's 12 or 6. It doesn't matter.
Right.
In the hours after the murder, investigators, of course, did a thorough search of the house. And inside Dylan's room was a very vast collection of BDSM equipment and sex toys.
Uh-oh.
Now, based upon what was found, I think it would be fair to say that Dylan was very heavily into the BDSM lifestyle. Like, these were not novice devices. These were not, we're trying to spice up our marriage, so we're going to buy a toy devices. These were meant to inflict pain, humiliation. These were serious. Okay. In one evidence photos, I counted over 20 different types of devices just used for penetration. There were also caging devices, different types of restraints with real locks. Again, not novice stuff. There were also numerous pornographic images found in Dylan's room, with many of them being images of Joe, Victor, and Dylan. And it was very clear in these images that though Joe was the obvious ringleader in real life, in this particular fetish relationship, Dylan was very much dominant and Joseph was submissive.
Okay, interesting. Isn't that the case? They always say if you're big time in real life, you kind of want to be dominated.
That's what I've heard.
In private situations.
I have heard that. I've heard that, what you do day to day is not necessarily what you want to do when you get home. All of these findings brought investigators back to the idea that maybe Robert could have been restrained. And perhaps that was why there was no evidence of movement during his stabbing.
Yeah, I'm going to say, because if you know what you're doing in this situation, of course, you and I'm like, oh, restraint. I'm thinking duct tape. I'm thinking rope. I'm thinking those kinds of things. But if you have some other padded something or this or that, and you have experience with these things, and you would know how to restrain someone without leaving a mark.
You got it. You hit the nail on the head. These restraints are designed for this purpose and are, designed in such a way they often don't leave marks.
Yeah.
They don't leave
obviously.
Injuries.
Yeah.
Right. So now this begs the question, is it possible Robert was forcibly raped?
Right. It should be easy to find out.
Well, we find out something. A sexual assault kit was performed during the autopsy. And here is where it finally appeared investigators were going to find the first smoking gun, because semen was found around Robert's genitalia and inside his rectum. So we now have DNA evidence.
Yeah. Boom.
Investigators waited with bated breath for the results to come back. And when they did, no one could have predicted the results. The semen on Robert's genitals and inside his rectum was his own.
Question mark? What?
So without getting into too much detail, the most obvious way that this would have happened is if Robert ejaculated and then something with his semen on it was used to penetrate him.
Right.
Which again furthered investigators' theory that Robert had been sexually assaulted. And let me tell you, my husband and I had a very interesting conversation about me trying to find out, was there any other way that this could have happened? Like, what if this happened? What if this...
Have you ever accidentally...
What if you didn't take a shower? So I think it's fair to say he was probably penetrated with something with semen on it.
Okay. Like, there's no way it accidentally traveled there.
Probably not. But see, I'm not a man. I don't know. Is it, like, if you'd ask me, I can...
You don't have the equipment to do the testing.
I don't.
You don't. Okay.
Sorry. I did my best. But
this is
sorry.
our limitation as a podcaster.
Yes, this is where I have to say, it's the best I could do. Now, one of the items found in Dylan's room was an electrostimulator machine. So basically a TINS unit.
Yeah. And it could, makes you ejaculate, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So in the world of BDSM, this machine can be used to force stimulate ejaculation. And the theory is that Robert may have been forced to ejaculate, again, because he's a straight man.
Right.
And then afterwards, one of the other devices was used for penetration. However, none of Robert's DNA was on any of the sex toys.
Because they were on the ones they got rid of.
Could be. It could be.
But because that was the stuff that they threw out.
Could be. But here's the thing about the BDSM lifestyle, like as a whole, and I'm sure there are bad apples. I'm sure there are exceptions, but it very much revolves around consent. The BDSM lifestyle is consensual. But these investigators immediately took it to a place where it was like, okay, you're into this kind of stuff. You obviously raped and killed this man. And so...
Oh, no. Typically, this is a lifestyle because typically there's two willing partners.
Generally, when done correctly,
yeah,
this is a consensual act.
Not saying that Robert was one, but...
No.
Typically, so these things are not simply torture device. They're
could be.
Right.
A psychopath could use them.
Absolutely. But that's not, the lifestyle does not automatically mean murder.
Correct. And I guess where I kind of get hung up here is because I'm like, if you're into this, then you know that it's consensual. So like, would you get the same thrill out of raping and killing someone that you would get out of doing this just in a consensual relationship? Like, to me, they don't connect. It doesn't connect for me. Anyway.
I think, could both things be true? Sure.
Could you be a psychopath and also engage in
yes.
consensual activity?
Yes.
I
think
guess.
Both could be true.
Sure.
Think about all these serial killers that also had wives that thought they were the perfect family man.
Yeah. I can see that.
You can be told. Having consensual, loving, sex with your wife and then also going out and raping and killing women. The two they're not mutually exclusive.
No, that's a good point. Now, we can't really look at this case without also asking if it was possible that Robert was a willing participant in this activity. But based upon everything we know, Robert was straight, very happily married, and there's absolutely no evidence at all that Robert may have been closeted or even curious in any way. There's no text messages, no emails, no computer searches, nobody's come forward. So I think we could rule that out. I think we can rule Robert engaging in any of this activity willingly. I think that's not a possibility.
Well, and even the fact that he had called a different friend, a female friend first, and then calling Joe, you know what I'm saying? So it's not like he's like, that would be my first choice. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, it just, nothing seems to fit that he would have been a willing participant in this.
Right. And if that's not enough to make you think, no, Robert didn't choose to do this, he was actually found with his night guard in his mouth. Kathy said it was the very last thing he did every night after brushing his teeth. Ecstasy was found at the crime scene, but no other drugs were found. And a toxicology report was, of course, done on Robert. So this should tell us, was he drugged? Stephanie, the results came back negative.
Even with those two unidentified needle marks.
The results came back negative. However, he was not tested for any hospital-grade paralytics that are used in medical practices, specifically a certain drug that investigators believed may have been given to Robert, succinylcholine. And the reason they chose not to test for this drug is because apparently it naturally breaks down into compounds that naturally occur in the human body, and it doesn't show up in toxicology screenings. So he could have been drugged with this paralytic.
Why do investigators think this particular paralytic would have been more likely to be used on him?
One, because it's a paralytic. It's one thing if I take a sleeping pill, you start stabbing me, I'm going to wake up despite being drugged. They found ecstasy. Let's say ecstasy knocked you out. Like, you're going to wake up upon being stabbed. But for him to be, like, paralyzed, it needed to be something strong. And there may be one more reason I'm going to tell you in a few more minutes.
Okay, well, that's what I want to know. Did these men have access to this?
Maybe.
Okay.
I'll tell you in a minute. Scent dogs who were trained to detect blood were brought in and hit on the lint trap of the dryer. And they also alerted on the rear stairwell drain, which is interesting.
Oh, yeah.
So somebody maybe hosed off.
Right.
I think it was the prosecutor's podcast where Alice said maybe somebody like hosed off.
Yeah.
Sending the blood down the drain,
yeah.
and then threw the clothes in the dryer.
Right.
Unfortunately, the contents of the drain were unable to be tested,
right.
as anything that had gone
right.
down would have been, diluted. Investigators thought all of this missing blood had to have been somewhere, right?
Yes.
So they brought in a reagent called Ashley's reagent, and this chemical is used to look for blood that's been cleaned up. And when they applied it at the house, eureka.
Okay.
It lit up positive all over the place. On the walls, in the shower, on the floor, on the flat surfaces. I mean, blood everywhere.
These guys are monsters.
Well, hold on. It was only after the reagent was applied that it was realized it was applied in a way that made the testing completely irrelevant.
What?
They did not follow the directions and completely botched the test. And once this chemical is applied, there's no way to go back and remove it. It's like a dye. And so any evidence that would have been gathered from doing that experiment properly was forever lost. So apparently you're not supposed to apply it on vertical surfaces because it runs and then destroys the actual evidence.
Oh, no.
And they put it everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Actually, in fact, over the course of their searches, investigators did $250,000 worth of damage to their house.
No!
Yep. And despite that, they were unable to find any DNA, concrete evidence, anything. Now, meanwhile, that steak knife that had been found at the crime scene had been sent to the lab for analysis.
Yes. Please tell me there were just fingerprints all over it.
No. Forensic results showed no DNA or fingerprints, even though Joe had warned authorities on the night of the murder that he'd touched the knife and his fingerprints might be on the knife.
Right.
But more interesting than that, Robert's wounds did not perfectly match the size of the knife blade. The steak knife's blade was 5 to 5.5 inches in length, but the depth of Robert's wounds was only 4 to 5 inches. And generally in a stabbing, the knife would go all the way into the body, sometimes even further. So sometimes even the handle of the knife will enter a wound just due to like the force. But in order for this to have been the knife that was actually used to kill Robert, it would have meant that the attacker stopped short by about an inch. And again, the 3 wounds were nearly identical, so they stopped at the same depth all 3 times.
I mean, is this like a weird methodical killing?
Isn't it so weird?
Ew.
It's so weird. Now, on the knife was found a piece of like human fat, some cut chest hairs. There were white fibers on the knife consistent with the towel that Joe had said he had used to stop bleeding.
Okay.
There was a looped pattern impression in the blood, consistent with the towel.
Okay.
But there was no blood on the cutting surface. So the actual sharp part that like actually does the cutting, no blood. But like on the sides of the blade were this like loop pattern. And investigators believe that the towel had been dipped in blood and then used to apply the blood to the knife blade.
What? Okay, that is also so weird.
So weird. Furthering this theory, there were cuts in Robert's gray t-shirt that loosely corresponded to his wounds, but there were no gray fibers from his shirt on the knife. So investigators believe the knife was planted and was not the knife used to kill Robert. Now, no one seems to really know why they would have done that. So here's the thing. I think if any of these three men killed Robert, I don't think they necessarily meant to. I think something went wrong. So I think maybe just like haphazard planning. There is more about a knife that I'm going to tell you in a few. So maybe we can talk more about it in a minute. But we don't really have a good answer as to why they would have planted a dummy knife, I guess is my point.
Well, unless they were, again, worried about their own DNA on it.
So get rid of the actual knife and put this dummy knife.
Right.
Yeah.
That they handled with a glove or with a towel. You know what I'm saying? They wouldn't have their DNA on it.
That's true. But it is their knife. If you pick up my butcher knife, the only person whose DNA is going to be on it, the only fingerprints are going to be in it at my house are mine. I'm the one who does the dishes and puts them away.
Yeah,
and
I guess so.
You know, so like I do think it matters that like they live there. Of course, my DNA is going to be on the knife. But let's talk about the knife. Okay. So during that same search of Dylan's room, investigators found a 3-piece cutlery set in his closet. And this is the kind of set you might use for like a Thanksgiving dinner. So it's like a big carving knife.
Why do you have that in your closet?
Okay, so I actually have a theory as to why. I have a couple theories. One, so he actually had in the past done some chef work, worked in like the food industry.
All right.
And I know chefs are like really particular about their knives.
That's true.
So he may not have just wanted this to be the cutlery set that the household used. He may have been very protective. I also kind of wondered if it might be part of the lifestyle. Maybe it wasn't a set that was used for food preparation. Perhaps it was
more like role playing.
There's even blood play and stuff like that. Now, I didn't do enough research to know like how they get the blood, so I don't know if it's through needles, through blades. I'm not sure, but I just kind of thought, you know, along with everything else, because a lot of people make a big deal about why wasn't the knife in the kitchen? Like, who keeps a knife set, a nice cutlery set in their closet? To me, there could be explanations.
All right, sure. So I'm assuming that there was a knife missing from this
oh my
set
gosh,
that matched the one that could have been the murder weapon.
Oh, wow. Yes. Wow. Yes, you are right. You were right on it. So there was a large carving knife that was there, a large carving fork, and then a smaller knife, but the smaller knife was missing. And the utensils were still in the original box with the packaging that kept them displayed, the cutouts.
Yeah.
So they were able to confirm that this missing knife was consistent with the knife that would have been used to kill Robert.
Dylan, I'm looking at you, bro.
Now, Dylan's mother would later say that the cutlery set had been a gift from her and that she had kept that third knife. To me, this doesn't make sense. Well, first of all, who gives this beautiful gift of this nice cutlery set and then is like, but I'm keeping one of the pieces?
Yeah,
that's
that doesn't
weird.
Make any sense.
But further or more weird than that, she couldn't provide the knife.
Yeah. No.
So
No.
Again, on the prosecutor's podcast, Alice was like, I hate having mothers testify on against their children. She was like, because they all lie.
Of course they do.
She was like, I would lie for my kid. And I was like, I don't want to say it, but I would totally lie for my kid.
Yes, we're mothers. That's what we're designed to do. I'm sorry.
Sorry. 3 months after the murder, the row house was burglarized by Joe's brother, Michael. And during this burglary, he stole flat screen TVs and he pawned them along with other stolen valuables. Joseph, Victor, and Dylan did not press any charges against Michael, who had a key to the house. Now, investigators remembered back on the night of the murder when Joe was asked who had keys, and he said no one but, the 3 men who lived there and a few contractors. So why did he withhold the information that his brother had a key to the house? Now, during the time of the murder, Michael was attending college at night, studying to be a phlebotomist. Investigators believed he would have had access to hospital-grade paralytic. It goes to show that Michael was not necessarily up and up, and he had a key to this apartment.
Right.
And he may have had access to paralytic drugs. Also, interestingly, Michael had perfect class attendance, except for one night.
Yeah.
Stephanie, you have any guesses as to what night he didn't go to class?
Now, I have to ask, was he part of this lifestyle as well, Michael? But we don't know if he was necessarily into this BDSM. Because we're talking about, equipment that may have been used on Robert that really only somebody that's into the lifestyle would understand how to use, I would assume.
That I don't know. I do not know if he
Okay.
was part of that lifestyle.
Got it.
But I do know that the one night he missed class was the night of Robert's murder. Now, investigators tracked his phone and found it was nowhere near the murder scene. Michael's partner also provided an alibi, saying that Michael was with him all night.
Okay. Was there a reason why he missed class?
Don't know.
Okay.
1 year after Robert's murder, his loved ones still had no answers. A $25,000 reward was offered, and Kathy began putting more pressure on the police to find the person or persons responsible for her husband's death. Kathy went to Robert's former law partners, and together they held a news conference. And during that conference, Kathy spoke and asked the public for more information. Those close to her noticed that she seemed to no longer believe that the three men were telling her the whole truth.
Yeah, because things are not lining up.
2 years after the murder, investigators found themselves in the same position. And at this point, they didn't think they could prove a murder charge, but they did feel that they had enough evidence to prove that Joseph, Victor, and Dylan covered up Robert's murder. So this is very interesting. It's pretty much a murder case without a murder charge. Okay?
Right.
In an effort to leverage one of the men against the other two, Dylan Ward was arrested on an obstruction of justice charge. But when he didn't crack, Joseph and Victor were also arrested, and the three were charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and tampering with evidence.
Oh, this is wild.
The three men had a very successful defense team, again led by Bernie Graham, that really famous, successful defense attorney. And at a pretrial hearing 2 weeks before trial, the judge said that the sex toys and the BDSM materials, as well as the semen that was found on Robert's body, could not be used at trial. And I really struggled with this, but then I remembered it's not a murder trial. It's an obstruction of justice trial.
Right.
So we're not talking about what may have led to a murder. We're talking about obstruction of justice, which is why the judge had to throw it out. But this was a big blow to the prosecution.
They're just using it as another tactic. They're not necessarily pushing to make these charges stick, but they're trying to get the men to crack too, right? Played a dual purpose.
They're trying to get him to crack, but they're trying to get him for something.
Right.
And I think they genuinely felt we can't get him for murder, but we can definitely prove they obstructed justice, which still carried a weighty sentence. 5 days before the trial, the defense attorneys filed a motion asking for a bench trial. And again, a bench trial is where instead of a jury, the judge decides the case.
Right.
Bernie said that most murder cases decided by juries end with guilty verdicts. It happens 7 out of 10 times because, according to Bernie, the jury looks out at the audience, sees those family members, those emotions, and just, finds for the family.
Sure.
He also argued that this case was publicized so much in the media that they would never get a fair jury. Now, Americans have a right to a jury trial under the Sixth Amendment. That is what is afforded to us. We do not have the right to a bench trial.
Oh, I thought if you requested one, you could have one?
The prosecution has the ability to object to this.
Oh.
The lead prosecutor, Glenn Kirshner, was very familiar with this judge. It was Judge Lebowitz. And she was the former homicide prosecutor and Glenn's former chief of homicide. Glenn had worked as her deputy years prior. So Glenn felt very comfortable that this judge would see that the absence of evidence was attributed to the fact that these three men covered up their actions. So no, we don't have evidence that they murdered them, but that is because they did what we're charging them with.
Yeah, but that's a stretch.
It's a stretch, but because he had this relationship,
probably true,
right?
But it's a stretch.
But he felt after having worked with her, she would be able to see that. So he did not object to the bench trial. Because it was not a murder trial, the prosecution did not have to prove murder. They only had to prove that the three conspired together to cover up the murder. This was obviously a very high-profile case. And it was believed the trial could last up to 5 weeks, and if convicted, each man could get up to 38 years in prison. So again, it was serious. It held serious consequences if they were found guilty. Now, Glenn knew he would have to prove 3 things at trial. 1, that there was no intruder. 2, that there was an issue with this lack of blood. And 3, that the knife had been planted. Those 3 issues proved that this was a cover-up. Now, Bernie explained how defense attorneys work in a way that I just have to tell you here. It's so beautiful. He acknowledged that prosecutors can give an incredible opening statement, and he likened it to their storytelling as building a beautiful building. But the defense's job is not to build a building next door that is taller and more beautiful. The defense's job is to destroy the beautiful building the prosecution built.
Right.
I thought that was a perfect visualization of like how it plays
true.
out. So in an effort to destroy the prosecution's beautifully built house, if you will, the defense was able to provide photographic evidence showing that these row houses had mail slots in the front door, and one of their investigators was able to stick his hand inside the mail slot and reach around and open the front door from the inside, proving that perhaps someone could have gotten in through that front locked door.
I mean, it's silliness, but I mean, is it possible? Sure.
The defense also submitted as an exhibit a clip of one of their own team members jumping over that 7-foot fence in the back courtyard quite easily.
Right, without leaving any footprints, handprints, scuff marks.
Right. Now, during the investigation, the defense talked to the housekeeper who worked at the house next door, and she explained that the morning after the murder, she'd found 2 foot impressions on the lid of a sandbox in their courtyard, as if someone had come over the fence or used the sandbox as leverage to get over to the other side of the fence. And she was so bothered by what she saw that she went next door and told the detectives there was something they might want to look at.
Okay.
Well, she was told by detectives, allegedly, hey, you don't need to worry about it. We already have the people involved. Now, I will say, full disclosure, according to the prosecutor's podcast, if this sandbox had been used as like a stepping stool to get over the fence, whoever was going over would not have landed neatly and cleanly in the courtyard, but instead would have landed in the stairwell going down to the basement. So it doesn't appear that this would have actually been helpful, but still worth mentioning.
All right.
Deputy medical examiner took the stand during the trial, said that one of the stab wounds went straight through Robert's heart. So according to the medical examiner, these injuries to the heart and other major blood vessels should have caused, in her expert opinion, significant blood loss. And she was actually able to measure the blood that was left in his body, and he only had approximately 1/3 of his blood volume left in his body. Where is the other 2/3 of his blood?
Well, it certainly could have gone down the drain in the bathroom, but because investigators screwed it up, we'll never know.
Now, Dr. Henry Lee, you recognize that name? Oh, I love Henry Lee. He was a witness. Okay, so he's like a blood expert.
Okay.
He was a witness on the O.J. Simpson case. He was in the Michael Peterson case.
Okay. Michael.
I really love him. Yeah, Michael Peterson, the staircase.
Oh, yes.
Yes. He was brought in as an expert for the defense. And according to Dr. Lee, he said that Robert bled out internally and all of the blood remained in his body. Dr. Lee said that Mr. Wone died almost immediately due to the damage to his heart. Now, this is just a complete disagreement from the medical examiner's report, but that's Dr. Lee's opinion.
Oh, I don't know.
Dr. Lee also explained, the weird blood pattern on the knife. He said it would have been like dipping a knife in a ketchup bottle, so like plunging it in and out. And so he said that would explain the kind of pattern left on the knife and the fact that maybe there was no blood on the actual cutting surface. Again, I don't know. I'm not the expert. Dylan's mother was brought in to testify, and again, she testified that she kept that missing knife. And I didn't know this. The cool thing about a bench trial is a judge has to submit an opinion as to how they came to their finding, their conclusion.
Right. I did know that. Yes. Because you want to make sure they're being fair and impartial.
Right. So like in a jury trial, you're just going to get guilty, not guilty. You may get 1 or 2 jurors later saying, here's what we were thinking. But the judge really has to show her work. So in her final opinion, the judge dismissed the intruder theory. She read a 30-page opinion, and it was like a roller coaster. You can find it online. 1 minute, it sounds like they're going to get convicted. The next minute, it sounds like they're going to be found innocent. It was up and down the whole way.
So she kind of went through every detail of like, I see how this fits, but then I see how this doesn't fit. Okay.
She did. For 47 minutes, she read this opinion. She found that the men had acted suspiciously. She found that the knife was not a plant. She found that Joseph Bryce had tampered with the knife at the scene, but she could not say whether it was an effort to obstruct justice. She could not be sure that the blood had been cleaned up or that the men had delayed making a 911 call. Ultimately, she found the men not guilty. However, she also acknowledged the men were withholding information. She said there was a difference between moral certainty and evidentiary certainty. And she pretty much just said, I know these guys did it. I don't have the evidence.
Yeah, which sucks.
Sucks. In November 2008, Robert's widow, Kathy, filed a wrongful death suit against Joseph, Victor, and Dylan. The suit was settled on August 3rd, 2011 for a cash settlement to a charitable trust with the dollar amount undisclosed. The last we know about Joe and Victor is that they live together in Florida. Dylan has left the relationship and is now married, and Joe and Dylan have changed their names. As of August 2nd, 2022, Robert Wone's homicide case remains open, and if you have any information that could help solve this case, we ask you to call 202-727-9099. And I just want to give, again, credit to the Peacock documentary, Who Killed Robert Wone. I definitely encourage you to go watch it. It was really, really good. And I got so much information from that. And then the Prosecutors podcast, they do it's 5 regular episodes. And, their episodes are, more than an hour.
Right.
Plus 2 interview episodes. One with Glenn Kirshner, the prosecutor. And then another episode where they interview someone related to the case. And what a wealth of information. So those 2 shows really helped me build this episode.
What do you think happened?
Okay. I think it was Dylan. I think Joe knows more than he will say. And I think Victor was probably an innocent party who was pulled in and knows. I think he's complicit in the cover-up. But I don't think he actively knew what was going on. I think he was genuinely surprised and upset. But I think Dylan. Now, I don't know I don't know. Was Dylan high on drugs and did something that was completely out of character, attack Robert in some way? I don't know the why. It's so bizarre to me.
It's so bizarre. And again, such a skinny timeline. Robert just shows up and is like, I'm going to take a shower and go to bed. And then all of this happens.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just can't imagine drugging your friend and sexually assaulting your friend and then murdering your friend.
And then rinsing off your friend. And
yeah, I feel like, I could probably talk for another hour about all the what ifs. I don't know. I know there is a type of blood play, and that sounds like the kind of thing Dylan may have been into. Again, he was into the hardcore stuff. So did something go wrong? And he lose too much blood and then they clean it up. I really don't know. I don't know, but I think it was Dylan. I think it had to have been Dylan. I think Joe potentially could have participated in some way, but Victor, I think, was
got sucked in and,
knows more than he'll probably ever say. What do you think? No,
I think I'm along the lines of what you're talking about.
Dylan was the odd man out. He was the one on the floor. He was the one on the level, the one who had access.
The one that had the most access.
The one who had the tools to get the job done, quite frankly.
Exactly. And the know-how to do it. He was the one who enjoyed being in that dominant role. And I hate to say that because, again, consent is so important. So I'm not trying to say that if that's your thing and you enjoy being dominant, you are the kind of person who's going to attack somebody. I don't think we're being critical of that lifestyle at all. It's very, very possible that he was just a bad apple.
Absolutely.
So I can think what you're saying. You're trying to be delicate and saying he doesn't represent everybody that lives in this lifestyle.
No.
Right. And I
think almost the opposite. Saying. I think totally the opposite. I think this lifestyle revolves so much around consent and consensual activities. So I think it's actually the opposite. That's what throws me, is because I'm like, if he's involved in it in the right way, then why would he do it the wrong way.
Well, and again, I think you can explain that by saying, I think many people have this duality to them where they view people differently. You know, they view someone as, well, that's my family member. I would never do something to hurt them. And then they view somebody else as just expendable.
Right. It's weird.
But yeah, I think that's where my mind goes. So that would leave, because again, if that timeline is correct, that the neighbors heard Victor scream, if the neighbors heard Victor scream between 11 and 11:30, let's just say at the outside it's 11:30, that still leaves 20 minutes for the men to kind of clean up and get a story straight.
Right.
So to me, it's like the other two men are like, Dylan, what did you do?
Right.
And then Joe tries to put something together to cover it up.
Right. Shower, clean themselves up.
Exactly.
Wash away any blood. There's obviously missing blood. There's missing blood.
Clearly missing blood.
There's missing blood.
There's no way. The whole bleeding internally, maybe some, but I'm sorry, you don't have 2/3 of your blood volume in your body and it's not noticed on the autopsy.
Right. Well, and I even question if he was even murdered in the bed, or was he put in the bed afterwards? But then where was he? Because again, he would have been restrained or drugged, so not moving.
I would say,
was he in the bathtub?
Yeah, that I mean, not knowing anything outside of what you just told me, I would think the bathtub.
And he just, for whatever reason, decides to assault and stab this guy in the bathtub.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes no sense. It just makes no sense. But what else? What else could it be?
What else could it be?
Yeah.
And also, it's horrible. How incredibly horrible. And for this jerk to pull in these other, I'm going to say innocent. Obviously, if they're covering up the murder, then, you know, they're guilty of that. But potentially innocent family members, quote, family members, that's how they referred to themselves. So, I mean, not cool.
Here's the really interesting thing. They have never been charged for murder. So they still could be. This is not a double jeopardy.
No, so, and I hope that they are. I mean, Dylan, yeah, I'm with you.
If evidence ever comes out, they can still be charged for murder. So,
yeah, but again, the investigators ruined the entire crime scene. So what more could come out outside of one of the men cracking? But, I mean, I gotta tell you, all three of them have some pretty good fortitude.
Well, and here's something else that, oh man, I can't remember who it was in the documentary now. I don't remember if it sounds like something a defense attorney would say, but in my mind it wasn't. Someone in the documentary, you have to watch it to find out who, literally said, if two people know something about a crime, you're going to get something out of one of them. If three people know something about a crime, it's impossible. Like it's impossible that they all three stay silent. But yet here we have three men who've been completely silent.
And I have to say, I mean, either they're like the best secret keepers on the absolute planet and they all found each other, or they really are innocent.
But then who did this?
And again, the idea of an outside intruder to me is just nonsense.
The intruder, no. Mainly for me, I would buy the intruder, except for they didn't come with a knife. They didn't know Robert was going to be there. They passed by all these other rooms. But the big thing is, if I stab and kill somebody, I'm going to be going out the nearest exit. I'm not going to be taking my time to find the back door. And
no, none of that makes any sense. And the fact that all three men were like, oh, it was the back door. Oh, it was the back door. Like, that seems weird to me. I don't know.
I feel like they may have been saying that because the front door was locked. But at the same time, the front door had the chime.
Right.
And the back door was found ajar, which is convenient.
And nobody heard anybody on the stairs because no one was on the stairs.
Yeah, I don't know. This one baffles me. It really baffles me because I think I know the who, but I cannot figure out the why. The why, I just don't get it. I don't get why someone who has no history of murdering people murders someone.
Chooses that night at that time.
And here's the other thing. Again, given the timeline, it's a rush. It's a rush job. Like, we were rushing to get this done. We're not even like, I don't know.
It's like he was just waiting. Like, well, the next person that comes, I'm ready and set to go.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It makes no sense. No sense.
Wow. Well, as promised, it was indeed a doozy.
I told you it would be.
Wow. Wild. You really got me with that semen thing. That's wild.
Isn't that
his own semen?
I know. And here's the thing that I wouldn't have thought that was impossible. I could have thought, well, what if you,
Yeah.
I'm keeping it PG, so I'll stop there. But you know what I mean?
Okay. Wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah, this is definitely more of a twisty-turny case.
It is. It is.
Which I love. Also, I
It's a
feel so
sad
bad
one.
for Kathy.
Oh, and Kathy is like
terrible.
the epitome of class. She doesn't do interviews. She really speaks out. She is a strong woman, an elegant woman, a classy.
Yeah.
It makes me really sad that she had to go through this. And the times that she has spoken out, I did watch an interview with her and she was like, I don't like to speak out on it, but sometimes I feel the need to because I consider this sacred. Yeah. And the years I spent with Robert were sacred. So I'm going to talk about it under this, in talking about, getting more information or whatever it is she may be speaking on.
Bless it.
Yeah. All right. Well, cheer us up with some branch of hope, would ya?
Oh, man. I will. And our branch of hope this month refers back to our Ebony Spears case that we covered at the beginning of September. And we have been so incredibly touched by the comments of support for that case. And I will tell you, just for me specifically, that case is really personal to me, and covering it was very personal, and giving it a platform for Ebony and her family was very personal to me. So the fact that we've gotten feedback of support of women of color, the fact that we've gotten people giving us support for addressing mental health issues, I mean, it's really touched our hearts, genuinely. I mean, Cynthia and I were like tearing.
We were both crying over one comment in particular. It was just like, okay, we're doing our job.
Exactly. So our branch of hope goes back to CUE missing persons, who helped search for Ebony after her family felt that the police department and investigators weren't pounding the pavement as much as they should.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. And Q originally started in Wilmington, North Carolina, where Ebony was from, but now it's a nationwide missing person search. They're a complete nonprofit organization and run by volunteers, and we are just so pleased to support them and have them as our September 2024 case. So any direct donations that you want to give, you can find their contact information on our webpage or on our social media account. You can also donate by becoming part of our Patreon, where a portion of your subscription goes directly to our nonprofit sponsored organization of the month. So again, we're a podcast leading through words and actions. Actions means supporting the community in which we are speaking about. We think that's the right way to honor them and the right way for this not to become an exploitive venture for us. We really want this to serve the community that we live in, and this is the way we've decided to give back to them.
If you'd like to reach out to us, you can send us an email at thedarkoakpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and please check out our Patreon. Go to patreon.com, and in the search bar, put in the Dark Oak Podcast, will pop up. And we are really working hard to build that library, so more content is coming soon. We'd love to see you over there, and then you can feel good about where your dollars are going. Join us next week as Oktoberfest begins.
Yes!
Next week begins Oktoberfest, and Stephanie is going to be bringing us a really fun, really creepy case. Tell us all about it, Steph.
Well, I wanted to start it out with a bang. So Oktoberfest, for anyone that doesn't know, is the dark oak celebration of the spooky month of October. So we have Oktoberfest in October, and it's 5 episodes. We have 5 Wednesdays this October. So it's 5 spooky episodes to get you in the spooky Halloweeny themey mood. And I'm bringing you haunted animals, specifically man's best friend. I've got 2 incredible ghost dog stories.
I cannot wait.
That also are a little true crimey and a little historical, even though they represent modern day haunts. So anyway, they're really fun. I got like super into them, way more than I thought I would. So definitely come back next week. And then right after that, we've got 4 more weeks of really fun Halloween stuff. So if you want to get into the spooky mood, definitely make sure that you are subscribing and downloading these Dark Oak podcast episodes in the month of October.
All right. Well, thanks for listening.
Thanks, Shiver Seekers. Bye-bye.
Bye.